Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at Noon, President Park Geun-hye is expected to reshuffle some of her cabinet ministers this afternoon after hearing recommendations from her new Prime Minister, Wan-koo. Egypt's Air Force bombs Islamic State targets inside Libya, a day after a video shows the beheading of 21 Egyptians. Egypt's president says the situation in Libya poses a threat to world peace and security. Plus, 1 year after its release, we take a look at the effect a UN report on North Korea's human rights abuses has had on the regime. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon.
It's noon Tuesday, February 17th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome, and we begin with news that President Park Geun-hye has officially appointed Prime Minister Wan-koo.
Lee, who narrowly won parliamentary approval a day before, attended his first cabinet meeting as Prime Minister this morning after receiving his letter of appointment. He's likely to make recommendations to the president on a cabinet reshuffle that is to be carried out this afternoon. And as part of her administrative reforms, President Park is expected to not only fill the vacant seat of Oceans Minister, but also replace several other cabinet positions. However, there is speculation that she may wait until after the Lunar New Year holiday to replace her chief of staff. Now, as widely expected by market watchers, Korea's central bank is keeping its key rate steady at 2%. But with scores of countries around the world loosening their monetary policies, the sentiment is that the Bank of Korea will follow suit and cut its rate sometime in the first half of the year. Hwang Chie has more.
The Bank of Korea has decided to stand pat on its key interest rate of 2% for the fourth straight month in February. The rate freeze that came on Tuesday right before the Lunar New Year holiday gives the central bank more time to gauge the impact of two previous rate cuts in August and October last year. Those cuts, which came in line with government efforts to prop up the ailing domestic economy, left the country's base rate at an historic low not seen since the height of the global financial crisis in 2009. Still, market expectations are growing for another rate cut in the first half of this year. They're being driven by a wave of global monetary easing that countries like China, India, and Australia are engaged in, along with weak economic sentiment at home despite aggressive government stimulus measures. Low inflation also leaves room for more monetary easing. But lowering the key rate stokes concerns about the country's snowballing household debt that already exceeds $900 billion. The government's deregulation drive in the housing sector and a lower key interest rate have worked together to boost housing loans. Korea's Finance Minister Park Geun-hye also emphasizes the importance of implementing structural reforms. As top central banker Eoh Jin-joo says the current 2% rate is sufficient to support the country's recovery momentum. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Korea's producer prices fell for the sixth straight month in January to their lowest level in more than 4 years. The Bank of Korea said Tuesday that last month's producer price index slipped 1.2% from the previous month to 101.86, the lowest level recorded since November 2010. Now, compared to the same period last year, producer prices tumbled 3.6%, posting the sharpest annual decline since mid-2009. The central bank attributed the drop to the decline in global oil prices and industrial outputs. Now, exactly 1 year has passed since the United Nations published its first ever report on North Korea's human rights abuses. No significant progress has been made in improving conditions in the north as of yet, but as our Hwang Seung-hee tells us, the report was definitely effective in piling more pressure on the communist regime.
The UN's Commission of Inquiry launched its first-ever investigation into North Korea's dire human rights situation in the summer of 2013. The three-member panel met with North Korean defectors and experts in Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington to hear testimonies and collect data.
Forced abortions, trafficking, and other indignities imposed upon women, both as prisoners.
The outcome was a landmark 370-page report published last February that outlined North Korea's human rights abuses, including torture, execution and arbitrary imprisonment, deliberate starvation, and rape. It recommended that the regime be referred to the International Criminal Court for possible prosecution of leader Kim Jong-un. Pyongyang's initial reaction was anger, even threatening a nuclear war.
It is necessary to strongly react to the hostile forces attempting to meddle in the internal affairs of other countries under the signboard of human rights.
Then North Korea countered with a different tactic, publishing its own lengthy report on its human rights conditions and releasing American detainees. But all this was to no avail. The UN General Assembly approved a resolution on North Korean human rights, and the UN Security Council held its first-ever discussion on the issue in December. While any referral to the ICC would almost certainly be vetoed by permanent UN Security Council members China and Russia, Seoul is set to open a UN Human Rights Office next month. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Egypt has opened a new front in the global fight against the Islamic State militant group, launching airstrikes on IS targets in Libya. The strikes follow the videotaped mass murder of more than 20 Egyptian Christians on a Libyan beach. Cairo is demanding the world join it in destroying the extremist group's operations in Libya. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Anger erupted in Egypt one day after the Islamic State militant group released a gruesome video showing the beheading of 21 Egyptian Christians. That rage rained down on IS-controlled areas in Libya, where the decapitations are believed to have taken place. Egyptian state television aired footage of fighter jets departing a hangar. The words "Long live Egypt" can be seen written on a jet's tail as it sets off on its mission. This was followed by night vision aerial footage showing airstrikes destroying reported IS camps, training sites, and weapons storage areas.
Of course, what happened is a barbaric and savage terrorist act that goes back to the Stone Age. I can't imagine who would do that. Egypt has every right to defend itself, and it must take steps against this type of terrorism carried out by those fundamentalists.
While the bombings were taking place, some of the victims' families held a funeral service for their loved ones in El-Or village of Samalut, though their bodies presumably remain in Libya. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah Sisi is calling on the international community to expand its fight against the IS group beyond its strongholds in Iraq and Syria to include Libya. He says the situation in Libya is a clear threat to world peace and security. The UN Security Council and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon condemned the mass murder as heinous and cowardly. Pope Francis, in his Monday address, urged Catholics to remember their brothers who died for the mere fact of confessing Christ. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Now, global leaders and security experts will gather for an anti-terrorism summit in Washington this week. The White House is hosting the three-day meeting that starts Wednesday and targets strategies for countering violent extremism. The gathering was prompted by growing concerns about terrorist acts, from the grisly murders perpetrated by the group that calls itself Islamic State to the Copenhagen and Paris terror shootings and last week's murder of 3 Muslim students in the US. The final list of attendees is yet to be announced, but UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Jo Tae-yeol are expected to go there. Now, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says his government will draw up legislation on collective self-defense that will allow Japan to respond seamlessly to various emergency situations overseas. If the legislation is passed, Japan will be able to dispatch troops in certain limited circumstances. Giving an example of when Japan could exercise the right to collective self-defense, Abe talked about a hypothetical situation in which a US warship carrying Japanese nationals came under attack Abe also emphasized the new realities of today's world and vowed that Japan would do more to bring peace and stability to the Asia-Pacific region and to the world.
Korea's Incheon International Airport is celebrating a record 10th consecutive year as the best airport in the world for service. The Airports Council International gave Incheon a near-perfect score of 4.97 points out of 5. It also came top of the pile in other categories. It was named the top Asia-Pacific airport as well as the top big-sized airport. Incheon International Airport was included in that category for the first time as it reached the 40 million passenger mark in 2013. 1,800 airports participated in the survey. Now, the rapid increase in the number of Chinese visitors to Korea is really giving a great boost to the nation's tourism-related industry. This year promises to be the best year yet, especially during the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday, which starts tomorrow, which is forecast to see a record number of Chinese coming to Korea. But there are serious concerns this trend might burn out pretty fast, especially if the quality of tourism services continues to leave some visitors cold. Kwon-soo has the details.
It's that time of the year again, when a single country's visitors to Korea bring about happy smiles to the nation's economy. It's Chinese tourists who are flocking in again for this Lunar New Year's holiday season, the biggest in China, beginning on Wednesday. This year's number of visitors to Korea during the one-week period is expected to reach around 120,000, a 30% fold jump from last year. Visits are on a steady rise, with a total of 7.2 million Chinese expected to come over this year. It's welcoming news for the sluggish domestic economy, as shopping tops the to-do list for the average Chinese tourist.
I bought a lot of cosmetics, shoes, and clothes.
Experts say this year looks especially promising.
Chinese tourists are estimated to bring Korea around $180 million from direct consumption just during the Chinese New Year holiday season, and that figure will probably top $630 million for all of February.
But not everyone is satisfied with everything they experience on their trip.
I had no problems with communication or accommodations, but I did have problems trying to receive after-service for something I bought here last year.
A recent study shows that Chinese tourists complained the most about having troubles with communicating during their visit. Second and third on the list were unsatisfactory food and high costs. This is why experts say there needs to be a bigger focus on high-quality tourism rather than quantity, so that the Chinese visitors do not call their trips to Korea a one-time experience. Kwon-soo, Arirang News.
Now, as we just heard in that report there, the 3-day-long Lunar New Year holiday begins on Wednesday, tomorrow. Most Koreans will be exchanging gifts with their family and friends, and that means that it is by far and away one of the busiest times of the year for the nation's very hard-working delivery workers. Shin Se-min reports.
'Tis the season. It's that time of year again when the postal service in Korea gets flooded with packages filled with items like fresh fruit, meat, health products, and other popular seasonal gifts. They will be shipped to cities and towns across the country ahead of Lunar New Year's Day. Piles of packages. Over 500,000 parcels are being checked in and out of this distribution center every day, at least during this time of the year. The amount? Nearly double the usual, forcing the Postal Service to expand its manpower by 10% for the holiday rush. While there is definitely gratitude owed to the senders of these items, the back-breaking work of local postal and delivery service people should not be forgotten.
네, 안녕하세요. 택배 기사인데요. 네, 알겠습니다. 지금 올라갈게요. 택배요.
Lee Chung-hee has been delivering some 300 boxes a day, trying to keep up with the rush of packages. His days have gotten longer and his nights of rest much shorter.
I don't really look forward to the holidays. I used to like them, but being in this profession has changed my perspective. Now, I personally hand-deliver gifts to my relatives.
Despite the drawbacks, Lee still gives 110% to his work.
It's a little nerve-wracking. I have to be careful that I don't lose or mishandle any of the packages, especially because I know they're gift boxes.
And thanks to Lee and others like him in the delivery service, hundreds of thousands of people across the country will be able to share and enjoy an even happier holiday this year. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Let's now continue our look through the global headlines we're following this Tuesday lunchtime from Seoul. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim at the News Center.
Eunice, the standoff continues over the future of Greece's bailout program. Athens has outright rejected a 6-month extension demanded by the group of Eurozone finance ministers.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. Monday's meeting was cut short just 3 hours after it began, after the Greek Prime Minister flatly dismissed the Eurogroup proposal as absurd. Greece's creditors said Athens was not welcome back to the table unless it requests an extension to the current arrangement by Friday. Song Ji-sun has the details.
Talks between Greece and Eurozone finance ministers over Athens' debt crisis broke down on Monday after Greece rejected a proposal for a 6-month extension of its international bailout package, calling it unacceptable. Eurozone ministers handed Greece an ultimatum on Monday to request an extension to its debt bailout program with the conditions unchanged.
Within that program, a lot of changes are possible. There is flexibility. But the main features of the program, keeping the budget on track, reforming the economy, have to be maintained. But the first step would be an extension, and then the second step is let's talk about the content of the program, but not the other way around.
The Eurogroup added the talks will not resume unless Athens submits an extension request by Friday. Greece is seeking to overhaul the terms of the $270 billion bailout package that comes attached with strong austerity measures.
And let's find common ground between the two. This is what we've been saying from the beginning. It's not a bluff, because it's the only option we have. It's plan A, there is no plan B.
Greece reaffirmed that it intends to stay within the Eurozone and that it's optimistic the two sides can reach an agreement before the package expires. The program ends on the last day of February, and if it does, Greece's coffers will likely run dry. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
And staying in Europe, back in Denmark, tens of thousands came together in remembrances for the victims of the weekend's twin terror attacks at a free speech gathering and outside a Jewish synagogue. An estimated 40,000 people flocked to vigils across Copenhagen, where flowers were laid and candles lit in the colors of a nation that prides itself for its safety record. Denmark's prime minister pledged to remain strong and not be intimidated by extremists attacks to free speech and other liberties. Meanwhile, authorities believe the late gunman, identified by local media as 22-year-old Omar El-Hussein, may have been radicalized while he was in prison for a violent knife attack. El-Hussein was born and raised in Denmark and is not believed to be a part of a wider terror cell. And finally, an earthquake rattled waters off of Japan's coast earlier this morning, triggering a small tsunami of about 10 centimeters. The U.S. Geological Survey said the magnitude 6.8 tremor hit just after 8 a.m. this morning local time at a depth of about 10 kilometers east-northeast off the coast of Iwate Prefecture. JMA issued a tsunami advisory, but no immediate damage was reported. NHK also said there were no irregularities cited in the region's nuclear power plant.
Yeah, back here in Korea, the country's southern port city of Busan has blossomed into one of the nation's best culture and tourism hubs over the years. But some in the city are saying the shine is starting to come off. So what does Busan need to do to keep pushing forward? Our Ji Myung-gil sat down with a lawmaker from the city to find out the much-needed measures.
Busan, probably known for its annual film festival and the G-Star Global Game Exhibition, is striving to become a global city. What more does it need to do, and what other investments need to be made in order to make it a competitive global city?
I believe Busan can gain competitiveness on the global stage by expanding the convention industry and revitalizing the economy of the western part of Busan, which is lagging behind in development compared to the eastern part of the city.
Busan wants to build a new airport and is currently bidding for the 2028 Summer Olympics, which is all part of the future vision for the city. All of these projects will require a significant investment. What do you think about the values of all the projects in relation to the size of the investment?
Focusing on external development is important with the Olympics, as you mentioned. But I believe working toward internal stability is also important. Busan is facing problems such as elderly poverty and increasing suicide rates, both of which are far above the national average. There need to be policies that can help boost quality of life for the citizens of Busan.
In fact, all these problems could apply to other cities in Korea too. How do we move away from metropolitan development and toward balanced regional development?
Busan is barely keeping its title as Korea's second largest metropolis after Seoul. Cities like Busan need to encourage balanced regional development to ensure national competitiveness. National policies should be oriented towards helping people who live in provincial cities to establish a firm footing in their hometowns.
As a member of the Parliamentary Committee for Education, Culture, Sports and Tourism, what are you hoping to achieve this year?
In order to keep Busan from slipping into decline, I think we need to make education the top priority. Many of Busan's young students are leaving to go to universities in Seoul because they feel a gap in educational opportunities. I think my duty is to narrow the gap with the capital region.
Thank you, lawmaker, for speaking with us today.
고맙습니다. And that was our Ji Myung-gil interviewing a lawmaker from Busan. Now, Korea hopes to launch its own lunar probe in the year 2020. A prototype has been made and is awaiting approval for further development, the first step to the final product. Our Kim In-ji reports.
With 6 wheels on a body made of 2 parts that are connected, this rover can move freely across rough terrain and bumpy surfaces. Even with obstacles in the way, it can move easily. This is the prototype of a lunar probe called the KEAST rover, which Korean researchers hope to launch come 2020. Now it needs to undergo testing to determine whether it will be able to operate in the extreme conditions on the moon, where temperatures range from -170 degrees Celsius to 130 degrees.
All of the electrical and mechanical parts are loaded inside the body, so they can endure the lunar environment. Also, the conjoined body allows it to move easily.
The researchers have also developed the technology to ensure the sustained movement of the ball bearings.
In order to operate in extreme environmental conditions, we need to use solid lubricants. Silver or lead or other metal lubricants that are durable in extreme temperatures are used to give the surface a thin coating.
When the prototype is determined as suitable, 3 models will be made in succession and put through further testing. The first model will be made with lower quality materials to test the mechanics, the second with the actual materials to test for durability, and the final will be made for flight. If and when the KEAST rover is launched, Korea will become the world's 4th country to launch a lunar probe after the US, Russia, and China. 김민지, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. It seems like all the snow flurries have let up in the capital area, while snow keeps falling over in Gangwon-do province from yesterday, so be safe out on the roads. And for those of you who plan to travel to eastern parts of the peninsula, be extra careful as 10 centimeters of more snow are expected there. And it should be a chillier day today, as the temperature readings will be a few notches lower than yesterday. So the daytime high here in the capital will rise to 5, while Daegu and Gwangju peak at 9 and 6, and Busan will top out at 11 this afternoon. And as for the other regions, Jeju Island and Daejeon should see a high of 9 and 5 respectively, and Dokdo peaks at 5. Now, thankfully, the weather should cooperate for the Lunar New Year holiday. The temperatures will remain on the mild side, but rain is in the forecast nationwide on Saturday afternoon, which is likely to continue on Sunday morning. Well, that's all for me today, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Well, thank you very much, Jeon, for the weather, and those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Have a great holiday for those of you in Korea, and we'll be back at the same time next Monday.
Yes, have a wonderful Lunar New Year, and we'll see you next Monday. Goodbye.